The prairie woke under a pale, trembling dawn. Dust swirled in ghostly ribbons across the empty fields, catching the first weak light and turning the horizon into a blur of gray and gold. My horse snorted beneath me, hooves stirring the frozen dirt, and I felt the emptiness of that land pressing down, cold and unyielding. The wind whispered secrets I did not want to hear. I rode the northern trail, boots tight in the stirrups, eyes scanning for anything out of place. That's when I heard it, the faint creak of wood, dragging across dirt that should have been still. Hoofbeats echoed behind a veil of mist, too heavy, too deliberate to belong to a lone rider. And then I saw him, or rather it, a massive horse, muscles taut beneath frost-laden fur, hauling a wagon that looked older than most of the fences around these parts. It moved with the steady rhythm of inevitability, dragging the creaking wheels over rocks and ruts, each bump and grind a warning. My heart thudded against my ribs, a mix of awe and dread tightening around me. I urged my horse closer, the wind whipping at my coat. The wagon groaned under a mysterious weight, and a chill ran down my spine as I glimpsed the shadowed bundle in the bed of it. Curiosity clawed at my caution. What or who was inside? I reached the wagon and, hands trembling, I lifted the canvas flaps. The sight tore at me. A child, no more than 10, curled in tattered blankets, pale and shaking, eyes wide with terror. Their lips were blue, their small hands clutching a bundle of letters and worn documents. Something had gone horribly wrong before they came here, something desperate. I swallowed the lump in my throat. The papers hinted at betrayal, stolen land, lost fortunes, stories of men who would kill to keep their secrets buried. And yet, here was life, fragile and trembling, carried across miles of prairie by a horse alone. I reached down, voice low, steady. It's all right, little one, you're safe now. Tears stung my eyes, though the wind tried to steal them away. The dawn had never felt so heavy, so real. The prairie held its breath, and I knew, in that moment, everything was about to change. The wagon creaked and groaned as I dragged it across the frozen prairie toward my cabin. Snow whipped sideways, slicing my cheeks with each gust. The giant horse had stayed behind, muscles taut and steaming in the cold, but the child, small, shivering, wrapped in tattered blankets, was the weight I couldn't ignore. Every step across the hard ground made me wince, the wood of the wagon rattling like dry bones in the wind. Once inside the cabin, I slammed the door shut, and the wind hissed through the gaps in the logs like a warning. Lantern light flickered across the walls, casting long, uncertain shadows. I laid the child on a bundle of blankets near the hearth, the fire crackling and sending sparks into the air. The smell of smoke and pine filled the room. Easy now, you're safe here, I said, keeping my voice low, steady. But the child didn't move, didn't answer, just trembled. Every sudden noise, a creak of a floorboard, a gust rattling the shutters, made them flinch, eyes wide with distrust. I fetched a tin cup of warm broth, setting it carefully beside their trembling hands. Drink, I said. It's hot. You need it. For a long moment, they stared, silent. Hunger battled fear. Finally, a slow, almost imperceptible sip. I could feel the tension in the air, thick as the smoke curling above the hearth. Trust here wasn't given. Not in these parts. Not after what the prairie had already thrown at them. The cabin itself seemed alive with the weight of our new arrangement. Every log, every corner, every shadow whispered secrets. Outside, the wind howled over the prairie, rattling the roof like distant gunfire. Inside, the air was thick with silence and suspicion. The child's eyes darted toward the windows, toward the dark beyond. I caught the weight of their gaze and knew danger could be lurking just beyond the snowdrifts. I sat near the fire, careful not to move too fast. We've got a long night ahead, I said softly. No one will touch us here if I can help it, but you need to trust me, even a little. They shook their head, just slightly, not yet ready to speak. I nodded, understanding. Trust isn't forced. It's earned, one small act at a time, like stacking logs for a fire that refuses to die. And somewhere in the shadows, I could sense the secrets the child carried, ones that, if revealed, could change everything. The fire in the cabin sputtered and crackled, casting long, trembling shadows on the rough-hewn walls. I sat on a wooden crate, my hands wrapped around a tin mug of coffee, its steam fogging the air between us. The child huddled near the hearth, knees pulled to chest, eyes wide, watching me as if I might vanish with the next gust of wind. I said nothing at first. Words felt heavy in the cold cabin. Silence had a weight all its own. Outside, the prairie groaned under the wind. It reminded me that no one was coming for us. Only we could hold ourselves together. Slowly, the child shifted, revealing the small bundle tucked beneath the blankets. A worn notebook, its pages yellowed and edges frayed, peeked out. I reached toward it, and the child flinched. "Easy," I said. "I'm not here to take it. I just want to see what you're carrying." The corners of the mouth twitched into something like a shadow of trust, but the eyes, those wary, haunted eyes, remained guarded. I understood. Whoever left this child to the prairie had taught them fear as a lesson, and fear sticks. As the firelight danced, the child began to speak in murmurs, each word fragile, tentative. "The landowner, he took everything," the voice whispered, barely above the crackle of flames. "My family gone. They say gone for good." The words hung in the air. I could almost smell the rot of betrayal, the bitter tang of stolen inheritance. Each fragment of their story was a cut, fresh and raw. But I listened without interruption, because listening was the first thing a survivor needed. Respect, patience, and a witness to their truth. I had learned that the hard way, through my own winters of loss and loneliness. I spoke then, my voice low, firm, as if telling a tale to the prairie itself. "I lost my sister to the river when I was your age. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. I carry that memory every day, like a weight in my boots." The child's eyes flicked toward mine, and I saw it. A spark of connection, recognition. Pain shared was pain halved, and perhaps, somewhere in that spark, trust could grow. The bundle in the wagon, the letters wrapped in oilskin, the faded maps tucked carefully between crates. They were more than paper. They were proof. Proof that the landowner who had stolen everything had enemies, rivals, debts unpaid, and crimes no one else dared speak aloud. I held one letter carefully, tracing the ink with a calloused fingertip. Names, dates, instructions, evidence of injustice that could change everything. No wonder the prairie had delivered this child to me. Whoever set these wheels in motion knew only someone like me would recognize their weight, their meaning. Meal after meal, quiet gestures, and whispered stories wove a fragile bond. I taught the child how to hold a cup without spilling it on the floorboards warped from the cold. The child showed me how to listen for wind patterns, how to gauge the distance of hoofbeats across the plains. Each lesson, each shared moment, stitched our fractured lives together. We weren't just farmer and child. We were comrades of circumstance, a family chosen by necessity, forged under the harsh prairie sky. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind that rattled the shutters, reminded us that the world outside was cruel, but inside, we could carve out a small corner of trust. The night deepened, shadows pressing against the walls like silent witnesses. "Do you think he'll come for us?" the child asked softly. I didn't flinch at the question, though I felt the chill of it crawl down my spine. "If he comes," I said, voice low and steady, "we'll be ready. And if he doesn't, we'll still be here. Together. That's what matters." A nod, slow and hesitant, passed between us. The bond had been forged, small but unbreakable, a quiet defiance against the vast, indifferent prairie. Survival, courage, and trust. Those were the treasures no man could steal. I heard it before I saw it. At first, it was faint, a soft drumbeat against the frozen earth, but it grew, steady and deliberate, hooves clattering over hard soil, echoing through the valley like a warning. My gut tightened. Something was coming. I crouched low beside the cabin window, peering through frost-coated glass. On the ridge, silhouettes moved, horses heavy with riders, wide-brimmed hats casting shadows under the pale morning sun. I didn't need to see their faces to know who they were. Raiders, hired guns, or worse, the man who had stolen so much, now coming for what we carried. A sharp crack split the cold air, A single rifle shot that slammed into the earth, just past the fence. Dust puffed where it landed, drifting like a ghost over the snow. I pressed my hand against the child's small shoulder. She flinched, wide eyes reflecting panic and frost. "It's okay," I whispered, though my voice trembled. "We can handle this." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of horse sweat, gunpowder, and winter pine. Every step, every stir of snow under hoof, and boots sounded louder than it was. Outside, the riders stopped for a moment, scanning. They weren't just hunting, they were warning. They wanted to break our will before breaking the door. I tightened the latch on the cabin door and checked the windows. This place, my small sanctuary, suddenly felt fragile. Not just walls and timber, but trust, hope, the very life we were protecting. The child shrank closer, and I could feel her heartbeat hammering like a drum of its own. And I knew we were no longer safe. The ridge was only a ridge. The world beyond it was waiting to claim what was ours. Survival would demand courage, and courage would be tested long before dawn. What would you do if you were in that cabin, facing hooves and guns and the weight of someone else's life in your hands? Could you stand when the wind itself seemed to side with your enemies? The wind howled across the prairie, rattling the cabin walls like a warning drum. I could feel the tension settling into my bones. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a threat. Every shadow in the corner a reminder that we weren't alone. I grabbed the old rifle from the rack, cleaned its barrel, and checked the stock. The scent of oil and gunpowder filled the cabin, a familiar comfort. I set to work on the windows first. Boards from the spare shed groaned under my hammer. Each nail I drove into the rough would felt like a heartbeat in time with the storm outside. I paused at one board, looked into the dim firelight, and saw the child's small face pressed to the glass. She flinched at the hammer's echo. I softened my movements, whispering, "It's for safety. Nothing can touch us inside." She nodded slightly, still tight-lipped, but her hand rested lightly against mine, tiny, trembling, but trusting. Next came the traps. I dragged old rope and sharpened stakes into place along the trail. I worked slowly, deliberately. One misstep could give away our position, or worse. Each spike and snare I set felt like drawing a line in the dirt. They shall not pass. The child watched from the doorway, her tiny hands clutching a ragged doll. She insisted on carrying it, even as I offered her a small knife to help. She didn't speak, but her determination was loud in her silence. That doll became a symbol of something more than comfort. It was a token of hope, of life preserved against impossible odds. We moved to the lanterns next. I hung them high in the corners, casting a warm glow over the cabin's interior. Shadows danced across the rough wooden walls, making them seem alive, almost watching. I carved my initials into the sill near the hearth, small letters that would not fade, a promise that this place would hold us. She traced my markings with a finger, lips pressed together, and I could see the spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, we could endure what was coming. By evening, rifles and shotguns lined the walls, tools at our feet. The cabin had transformed. It was no longer just a shelter. It was a fortress. But more than that, it was a declaration. Every nail, every rope, every flickering lantern was a word in a story of defiance. The child and I moved through the space together, checking each barricade, testing each trap. Our movements were synchronized, our breathing measured, our unspoken agreement clear. We faced this storm side by side. Outside, hoofbeats thudded in the distance. The first glint of steel on the horizon confirmed what we feared. The enemy was near. But inside, in this small cabin of rough timber and firelight, we were united. Fear still lingered, but it no longer controlled us. We were ready, or as ready as anyone could be when facing men who would not hesitate to kill for what they thought was theirs. And I knew, deep down, that the bonds we forged in that quiet, dangerous work might be the only thing that could save us. The first streaks of sunlight barely reached the horizon when I saw them. A dust cloud rolling across the prairie, growing, swallowing the land like a living beast. Riders, 10, maybe 12, armed to the teeth, moving with the precision of men who knew they were untouchable. I could hear the distant thud of hooves, a rhythm that made the air itself tremble. My heart kicked against my ribs. I felt the child stiffen behind me, eyes wide, fingers clutching the blanket I draped over her shoulders. I gripped my rifle tighter. Every breath came sharp, the wind whipping dust into my eyes. "They're here," I said, voice low but steady. She didn't answer, just stared at the horizon. The wagon behind us, still half buried in snow and mud from the past storm, held its secrets tight. Letters, documents, and maps spilling truths that men in power wanted buried. That truth was why they had come. That truth was why blood would soon be spilled. The first shots rang out before they reached the cabin. A bullet tore through the roof's edge, splinters raining down, dust rising like smoke in a fire. I dove low behind the battered wooden wall, firing once, twice. The child yelped but stayed crouched beside me. Courage threaded through fear. The raiders moved in formation, circling the cabin, hooves thundering like the drumbeat of doom. Every shadow seemed alive, every whistling bullet a reminder that out here, the prairie had no mercy. I peeked through the slit in the boards. One man raised his rifle, aimed, and fired. The shot splintered a beam inches from my head. I returned fire. Crack. Smoke. Splinter. Then silence before the next volley. Screams pierced the storm. Outside, the horse of the largest rider reared and fell, tangled in a rope trap we had set hours ago. Dust and blood mixed on the earth, painting the canvas of war. The child flinched, but I took her hand. "Steady. Keep your eyes open," I whispered. The battle raged like a storm itself, each gust of prairie wind carrying powder smoke and cries. Then, the hidden evidence from the wagon became our shield. Letters and documents torn from the satchels and thrown into the line of sight, exposing the antagonist's crimes. Faces pale as proof of betrayal, theft, and cruelty hit the men like a rifle, but to the chest. Their cohesion faltered. Panic flashed across their eyes. One by one, they hesitated, unsure if the man they followed was still untouchable. Amid the chaos, I felt the child push me forward. "We can't wait," she said, fire in her voice for the first time. Side by side, we fired, ducked, and ran through the cabin's shattered doorway, moving from cover to cover. Wood groaned under our weight. A beam collapsed behind us, cutting off the closest rider. Another stumbled in the mud, groaning. Each shot we fired was justice, each movement a prayer. I could see the antagonist now, flanked by his last men, rage and disbelief etched on his face. And then it ended as abruptly as it began. A final volley from our rifles, a desperate charge from the horse tied to the wagon, and the antagonist fell. Men fled into the horizon, dust swallowing them again. The cabin stood battered, splintered, smoke curling from the scorched roof. The child and I sank to our knees, breathing hard, faces streaked with grime and tears. Justice had been served, yes, but the cost was clear. The cabin was scarred, our bodies ached, and the prairie itself seemed to mourn the violence it had witnessed. We looked at each other, exhausted but alive. The wind died down, leaving only the soft hum of distant hooves and the low moan of settling timber. Around us, the evidence remained, proof that truth had survived the storm. We had survived too, scarred, shaken, but bound together in a quiet, unspoken victory. And as the sun climbed higher, burning through lingering dust and smoke, I realized that out here, survival was more than life. It was courage, and sometimes it was justice. The storm had spent its fury. Rain fell in soft, cleansing sheets, washing the blood and dust from the prairie, leaving only the smell of wet earth and gunpowder. I stepped out of the cabin, boots squelching in the mud, and watched the smoke curl from the chimney, thin and lazy in the early light. Dawn painted the sky in gold and rose, gentle warmth spilling over the wreckage of our night-long fight. The cabin stood battered, splintered boards marking the scars of violence, but it stood. I ran my hand over the rough wood, feeling every gouge and crack. It was proof we had survived, that the walls now held more than shelter. They held trust, courage, and the first tentative hints of family. Nearby, the giant horse grazed quietly, its massive frame moving slowly through puddles, free now from the burden it had borne. I watched the child's face tilt toward the sun, a smile breaking through dirt and tears. Laughter, soft at first, filled the cabin as blankets were straightened, fire stoked, and quiet hands worked to repair what the storm and men had tried to destroy. In that moment I understood. Survival was not the absence of danger. Survival was the rebuilding, the choice to care, the courage to start again. And for the first time, we all felt at home. I still see that prairie dawn, even now. The sky burned gold over the horizon, and the cabin, scarred, battered, stood quiet in the morning light. Smoke drifted low from the hearth, ropes uncut, and the wagon wheel leaned against the wall, finally at rest. Out here, justice never came wrapped in law or papers. It came on frozen hooves, in whispered courage, in those who chose to stand when it was easier to turn away. The giant horse, the child, the letters, they carried more than survival. They carried truth. Sometimes survival doesn't roar. Sometimes it comes softly, knocking at your door and waiting for you to answer. So I ask you now, what would you have done in that storm? If this story touched you, leave a word below. Ride with us again. Subscribe, share, and remember those who carried truth through the cold.